Every once in a while, people bring up the absurdity of collector's editions. How lame all the collectibles are, how overpriced the releases are, and how the games sometimes aren't even included with them. It's good for a quick and easy laugh, but I want to talk about something different related to this today. Collector's editions went through a weird transformation the past few years, essentially playing a different role within the gaming market than back when they were starting to come out. This video is not an attempt at justifying why these things exist, as I typically don't like spending more on a game just to get my hands on frivolous things alongside it. If you personally enjoy all the goodies that come with them, then all the more power to you. During the previous generation, when collector's editions started to come out for seemingly every game with all sorts of weird bonuses that nobody in their right mind really wanted or needed, they were a pretty blatant way to inflate pricing. I'm not going to suggest that's not what they're still used for, since that exact same tactic is still used with digital collector's editions and other weirdly overpriced releases, but stay with me for a second. Collector's editions were a quick way to get a higher revenue stream from a loyal audience looking forward to the new release in an established franchise or from a beloved developer. Much like all the geek toys and collectibles that people use to show their affection towards brands now, collector's editions were a way for people to put their money where their hearts are and get that cool extra thing for the release that they were waiting for. The gaming market was still a different place, and a lot of companies were still experimenting with all sorts of business models back then. Nobody figured out what to do with DLC yet, as this concept of selling more of the game in small chunks later was foreign to both players and developers alike. Game rental was still in its death throes, and if you were lucky, you could still rent your Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 games, but in my experience, all rental places around me were long gone before we entered that generation. But I still remember seeing people online talk about this and it being around for them. It was clear that the gaming audience was getting a little bit older and had a little more money, so the collector's edition started popping up everywhere. And a new enemy to video game distribution popped up, one that had always existed, but now that rental was dead, gaming companies felt the adrenaline rush through their heads after the kill and decided to find new ways to mess with this other threat that they now saw as the #1 problem. Of course, we're talking about secondhand sales? There might have been a real rise in second-hand ownership of games, and if there was, it likely has to do with both the gaming audience having gotten older, as a lot of pawn shops need you to be over the age of 18 to trade in things. And well, the death of rental likely helped this tendency people had to buy games second-hand, beat them, and then sell them off again and grabbing another title secondhand in return. I've known people who did this routinely to a point where they'd later rebuy games they'd previously sold because they wanted to play them again. With how often they did this, I kind of wondered how much extra money they were throwing out the window, not just holding on to those games. But it might not even have been that much worse than just renting games a bunch. Either way, secondhand sales were now the enemy, and the enemy had to go. This is when collector's editions started to push exclusive DLC, some going so far as to even do store-exclusive DLCs to make sure people buy from certain stores if they really care about having that full experience. You do care about this game, right? Then don't buy secondhand. Then there was all the shit that Watch Dogs got with its 500 million special editions with different additional content. Or Evolve, which also did this, plus store-exclusive DLCs. Remember Evolve? Yeah, that sure went well, didn't it? The anti-secondhand sales measure that annoyed me the most as someone who bought the game new in stores and actually received that content was the one from Dragon Age Origins, where they locked one of the party members, Shale, behind a download code that came with a new copy of the game. It especially bothered me because as I played the game, it became very clear that it would be lesser for not having this character, especially the Dwarf and Deep Roads quests, as it directly tied into Shale's story. This is not something you could just cut away from the game, but there we were. Part of the base game content was cut away as a bonus to murder secondhand sales, essentially. Recently, a game I wanted to play did something similar, except it managed to do it in a much worse form. The Day 1 edition of World of Final Fantasy is the only way to get access to the Japanese audio track. The option is always there in the menu, but toggling it without the Day 1 edition's exclusive DLC code just mutes the voice work in the game, since you don't have this data. They're not even selling it separately on the store. Now that we've successfully moved to a focus of digital distribution, which by nature doesn't allow secondhand sales anymore, we have a new enemy. Sales. It's not something people generally list as an enemy, but when looking at the way that games are released these days, it's not hard to see how most of the early marketing push is there solely to diminish the effects of them. This is where we come back to special editions and their function on the marketplace. The current role of special editions of games is a lot like what GOG did when they got their start. If you've seen the video about them on NoClip, people in Poland didn't know better regarding piracy, thinking those burned flea market game copies they were buying were legitimate, so they competed against it by delivering this special release filled with goodies and bonuses. A special edition is basically competing against the digital copy of itself, and while this sounds strange, a game competing against itself, it's because it totally is, and it's not the only thing factoring into this. Since we've moved to digital releases, we've also started an age of constant sales on all competing distribution networks. Indies often complain about how there's a race to the bottom regarding pricing, but now imagine how much worse it is with AAA titles, where you see their titles go as low as the indies often do, and how much faster they keep reaching that lowered price in this generation. Games are devaluing at a rapid pace lately, and there's a lot of reasons for that as well. The biggest reason for the declining pricing is because sales for a game drop off very quickly after the launch window closes, so any abnormal change in a game's pricing, like lowering it or putting it in a bundle, is going to move sales numbers by a lot. Do this frequently enough, and you can pad your sales numbers for a series or a game entry a long time after release, pointing at the success of it without bringing up how much the individual copies moved for. Even to this day, in the age of rapid price lowering and game bundles for $1, people still point to individual copies sold or owned or shipped as a conclusive number for the success of a game. And you can be sure that game companies prefer it be kept this way because every game's sales look a lot more impressive this way. And when nearly everyone is doing it, you kind of have to join to catch up with those flashy sales numbers from everyone else, right? Plus, the games aren't selling that well after the launch window anymore, so you're not losing money on this if you lower the price now. Those investors really like seeing the numbers go up too, and if they're not going up, they might leave you for one of those companies that do produce those increased numbers. The actual big revenue numbers still come in from the big full price releases, but getting those higher numbers are going to be nice when you want to push for a sequel because that old one sold so well. Except this creates a new problem. When everyone is sure that a game is going to sell for half the price of launch within 3 months, a lot of people are going to hold off on buying it. A lot of these people could have been your hardcore audience that would have gotten the game at launch if this later price drop wouldn't happen. You need to give them new reasons to buy the game on launch, like small print runs of special editions, or print day one editions, preferably with a nicer looking game case with the box art that the fans normally would scream at you for not putting on the regular cover. You know the one that doesn't look like trash. Maybe throw some special content in there, like locking the Japanese voice track for your Weeaboo game solely to the day one edition, so anyone who wants to play the game with the original voices is going to have to go back to that single release and hope they printed too many of these to ever run out of them. I hate you so much, Square. In this kind of market, the special edition takes a new role. They're not just for the die-hard fans anymore, and they're not just there to stop the indirect sales anymore. They're in direct competition with a company's own race to the bottom sales strategy. And how cynical you get about this depends on the company, as some gaming companies do that weird thing where they sell the special edition without any game under the belief that maybe some people will want the digital copy of the game instead, forgetting that they couldn't just put in a key to validate the game for a system of choice in there. But I guess they're afraid people will get the key and sell it on a shady key reselling site. Which is a problem in and of itself, since there needs to be some level of trust between a company and their players, and everything I've just discussed already spells out a great level of inherent mistrust. Though if we really want to talk about this, we should be talking about DRM implantation, which is not today's topic. The one thing that is weird to me is that if game companies are too afraid to give players digital keys, why do so many of these companies give free keys of games with GPUs and keyboards and other expensive gaming hardware? I mean, I know why they pack the games with those. It's to pad the sales numbers of a title and make the game launch look all that more impressive. But this is especially in combination with not even putting the digital key in a super expensive special edition, which is a bit baffling to say the least. There's another major reason companies have to push the special editions and the day one editions the way that they do. The launch day experience of most games suck. Previously, it was because of the day one patch problem, where increasingly big day one patches full of bug fixes were pushed out the door. This was because the tail end of the crunch-filled development cycle in order to meet the deadline had the developers printing gold versions that they probably wouldn't want to call gold themselves. These days, we get rebalance patches, content patches, re-releases featuring these content patches on top of these re-releases that are supposed to have all the patches as a complete product already. If you're someone who plays through a game once and then moves on, there is no reason for you to play anything on launch anymore. Unless it's a multiplayer focused game and you want to be part of the early rush when the game is new and everyone is trying to learn it. I mean, there's no reason, unless you don't want the nicer box art, or you don't like this art book and soundtrack, or you don't want the statue of the publisher's CEO holding a replica of your wallet in his hands. You want these things. So you buy the first day edition and the special edition. You get both of these, because the alternative, the digital release, what if the servers go down? At least if you have the disc, you can still play the game later. In its gold release buggy state without a day one patch, sure, but at least you have some form of the game later down the line. Now, I'm not going to say that you should never pre-order to get your day one edition, or that you should never get a special edition of anything. I'd be a hypocrite if I said these things. As much as I dislike a lot of the practices around the marked up releases, and the way that they're positioned to stop a race to the bottom started by the same people starting that race to the bottom, I think it's perfectly fine to spend your money on the thing you want, if you know it is what you want. Most of buying a product on the market is a fight between what you're willing to pay as a consumer to get what you want from a publisher. You're both at odds with each other to some degree. I just hope people become more aware of the position of the what and why of these special releases in the current day market. Most people's understanding of their function dates back to a generation ago, and it'll be interesting to see how the focus and use will shift as gaming changes in the coming years. I'm really looking forward to those exclusive subscription content rental schemes we're sure to move to if we go to the streaming service route that publishers have been glorifying for us lately. That is going to be a very fun time. Anyway, this was AboveUp. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, this video has been brought to you by people supporting me on Patreon, who you see scrolling on the screen right now. If you wish to become one of these scrolling boys, you can head over to patreon.com/AboveUp, and I'll see ya.